Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 24th of September and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 50, season 8 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. And once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed. So we'll start this week's show with a couple of shout-outs, Phil. And first of all, a shout-out from me to you, Andy Condy and David Billsborough for what was a really entertaining podcast last weekend. I actually listened as a listener because, as you know, I was on holiday and I listened to this on the plane coming home. So great show and, some really good insight from Andy and David, very much from the sort of rock face, what's happening in the used car market at the moment from both that wholesale side and the retail side. So fascinating show. So well done to you guys.
No, I think that they do quietly really enjoy it. I think it doesn't take them long to sort of accept the invite and to come on. To be fair, so they do really enjoy it. So, but it can't replace you. So, welcome back, Curtis, and hope you I hope Molly was glad to see you when you got back. I bet she was.
Yeah, I had a big welcome from Molly. Many thanks, and she did appreciate the shout out as well.
We did give you a shout out, yes, we did. So I mean, well earned rest, and fantastic. And again, thanks to Andy and David for helping me out and sitting in on that. But as always, we really enjoyed that. And we still have available the two special interviews that Curtis and I recorded before Curtis went on holiday, both with Dale Wyatt, who is obviously the boss of Suzuki UK and a friend of the show as well, and also Cambria Automobile's chairman, Mark Lavery. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to them, totally different interviews, totally different views on the market to a certain extent, but fascinating interviews with both Mark and Dale there. So if you've not had a chance, please do check your podcast feed and catch up on both of those interviews.
And this week's show, we have a sneak preview of an interview we've done with ICDP boss and industry analyst Steve Young, which will be available next week on your podcast feed. And there's lots of interesting thoughts and trends from Steve on things like customer care, EV transition, and lots more. So we'll have a little sneak preview of that in today's show, but do look out for that because Steve was on absolutely top form.
Yeah, we could have chatted about some of the stuff for hours, couldn't we, with Steve on that one? So fantastic. And we have the pleasure of welcoming back Stephen Whitton this week with his latest Menable Moment. So make sure you stay tuned to the midway break and listen to Steve. It's been a few weeks. I caught up with him this week, and as ever, he was eager to get back on and share his thoughts, and particularly this week. So stay tuned for that one. I think you'll not necessarily enjoy it, but it'll give you something to think about as always.
So we've got a busy show ahead. So headlines from AM, Motor Trade News, Auto Retail Agenda, Bloomberg and The Guardian. And they include used car sector no longer in a period of heavy demand, says Cox Automotive. Pendragon in talks to bring Chinese EVs to Britain. Cost of living crisis is risk to UK road safety, warns Halfords. Is the desire for car ownership falling? And used sales boost Peter Vardy business?
Yeah, so as you say there, Curtis, we're heading over to AM Online, who covered the story from Cox Automotive and myself on the used car market. And essentially what we include in here is the performance of the wholesale market performance through the month of August, to see what that was like in terms of performance and activity there, but also what's happening in the market around demand and consumer confidence and appetite for supply of vehicles at the minute, which is, it's still a very interesting imbalance between supply and demand, Curtis, at the minute more than anything else.
Yeah, definitely, and some interesting points in this stories. You're talking about the this imbalance of supply and demand. I was particularly struck by some of the trends around the average age and mileages of used vehicles because they haven't really changed that much, have they? I think in the piece that you say that the average age of used vehicles has gone from 96 months, which is 8 years in August 2019, to 104 months currently, which is 8.6 years. So not a huge change there. And mileage is pretty static at 70,000 miles.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a slight increase, and the age and mileage has sort of steadily increased as we sort of be pre-pandemic, and then significant saw that through the pandemic as sort of we know that the retailers ended up changing many of their stock profiles and going into older high mileage vehicles. We know that some of the manufacturers also increased the age and mileage limitations on their approved schemes, which then allowed the retailers to keep more of their part exchanges for retailing. So there, the consequence that then affected the profile of vehicles entering the wholesale arena, as you would expect. But I think what we are starting to see, we're seeing a little bit of recovery now as vehicles do start to come back into the market. We're now sort of towards the end of the second plate month of the year. Supply is starting to recover, albeit slowly and very much brand and model specific. There's still, even this week we've been hearing news of factory shutdowns through to semiconductor and supply shortages, whereas other manufacturers are saying they're still on target for achieving their forecast annual production levels by the end of the year. So again, kind of shows some of the complexity that's happening in the marketplace. And what we're trying to call out here is that, the days of what we saw in 2021 in that high level of demand, particularly from consumer demand, where we were seeing those significant high prices, is easing. When we talked to Darren Martin recently, he talked about that market now just starting to ease off. It's not a crash. We're not saying that at all. But, even in the last sort of 48 hours, we've seen the base rate, interest rate rise. We've seen, 30 points from the fiscal stimulus or mini budget or whatever the government are calling it. But also what we saw is the results of the consumer confidence from GfK this week, which is a minus 49 now. So another 5 point moves down in terms of consumer confidence. So there's a lot of pressure out there at the minute, but it's not a lot that we can control locally because this is global influences that are in fact impacting the sector.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying about we've got no control over this, but you do make the point in this story that dealers should really be looking at ramping up the quality of their marketing wherever possible. As you point out, the visibility of stock really does take priority now in this sector where demand is on the wane.
Yeah, yeah, and that is key, and we're seeing that in some of the performance figures. The first time and percentage conversions in those grade one and grade two, where the vehicle is ready to retail. It's minimal work required, if any. The turnover of that vehicle to get it onto to retail and get it imaged into the consumer market is fairly short. So there is a lot of demand for that, but also there is investment in the older vehicles and the ones that require a little bit of prep, but again, really just showing that we're at a point in time, we're coming in towards that end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter, that we need to get back down to, and it's, I hate using the terminology, but it is that back to basics. The imagery, the description, the pricing, getting your profile right is key at the minute. But again, lots going on.
Yeah, which really resonates with what David Bilsborough was saying last weekend about the way that stock should be marketed. So some clear lessons there. Now, next story is a combination actually because it's covered by Bloomberg and Auto Retail Agenda, and it's about latest developments at Pendragon. So maybe if we start with the half year results, because the biggest story in my view is actually on the back of the results. So first half results for Pendragon were very much in line with expectations, with profit before tax of 33.5 million on turnover of 1.85 billion. Now, the profit before tax figure was down from 35.1 million in 2021. However, analysts have pointed out that the latest figure did not include the 8.3 million pounds worth of government support and 7 million pounds worth of incremental marketing spend that was in last year's first half results. So, a pretty good first half one showing there for Pendragon, with turnover in first half of 1.82 billion pounds. But as I say, I think the more interesting story here was about BYD, which regular listeners will know because we talked about this a month ago. So BYD, they are the biggest EV manufacturer in China, and it looks as though they have been talking to Pendragon, because Pendragon has announced that it will be the lead launch partner for BYD in the UK.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and we won't steal the thunder too much of the interview with Steve Young that we'll play a clip of shortly, and you stay tuned for next week for the full interview there with Steve. But BYD isn't really talked about as much as some of the more new startups such as Sepang, Neo, Polestar, even if you can call Polestar a startup because they're obviously part of Geely and things like this. But BYD is a significant player in China. And they're very much, as we saw recently, and we talked about in terms of they partnered with the Heading Group in Sweden and Germany, as it's covered in Bloomberg there, that they've got also targets in Cambodia, Denmark, Japan, already in Sweden there, Israel, and really starting to ramp up this strategic plan that they've got. But we did talk about this, didn't we, in terms of whether it would be Pendragon because of
Yeah.
the heading link in both Germany and Sweden, which we did put to Steve, didn't we, on the interview?
We did indeed, and we made a rather bold prediction a month ago that, well, if Hedin are distributing BYD in Sweden and Germany, and they are Pendragon's biggest shareholder, it would kind of make sense for Pendragon to be interested in the UK, and that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's we yet to see why and how that all came
Yeah,
about in terms of operationally, but it
I,
would make sense to have someone like Pendragon as a UK distribution operation for BYD.
Yeah, definitely. I think we joined up some dots that weren't necessarily there, but we've had the same outcome. So,
We'll take that.
yeah, we'll take that. But you mentioned Steve. We did actually put this to Steve when we spoke to him a couple of days ago, and his views on the sort of ramifications and significance of this deal for both Pendragon and BYD.
Remaining with electrification and EVs, and this week it's been announced that Pendragon are in advanced talks and negotiations with BYD, and BYD are one of the larger Chinese electrification brands, and we know recently they've done a deal in both Sweden and Germany with the Heading Group for distribution of their products. Now, obviously, we've got other things going on with Pendragon, with the Lithia, the US business looking to try and buy Pendragon. There's obviously been Heading the same there. But we were talking before the show, and a lot of this is obviously speculation. We don't know for a fact because we're not in there. But just to clear up, what do you think is going on in this with one with BYD and two with sort of the Heading, Lithia, and Pendragon?
Well, I think BYD is a company that most people, even people in the trade, will not necessarily have heard of, but it's been around longer than some of the other brands that people have latched onto, like Neo and so on. And I think, at least at some point earlier this year, BYD overtook Tesla as the producer of the highest BEV volume producer in the world. So, they're a big major player, whereas some of these others, Neo, Xpeng, and other startups are just startups. They're infants. They produce less cars in total in their combined lifetime than BYD produce in a year. So BYD is a big player, and it's big news that they're coming to Europe, and they've done it by setting up sort of single country arrangements with big distributors. And our understanding of how the model will work is that BYD will operate some big brand centers themselves, 2 or 3 perhaps, in a market, and then the distributor will provide the after sales support and also then some limited additional sales points. So they've got sort of quite an interesting entry model. The sort of Pendragon news is therefore not a surprise. It fits into that context. We don't have sort of big distributors in the way that you have people like Lauman in the Netherlands, which is also the Toyota importer, for example. But we do have big dealer groups, and Pendragon is a reasonable choice. It's got good national coverage, and it makes sense from a Pendragon point of view to do it. It makes sense from a BYD point of view. Perhaps BYD, looking at what's going on in the Hayden Pendragon sort of battle, thought, well, we're already with Hayden in Sweden and Germany, so if Hayden are potentially going to buy Pendragon, then that will be quite tidy, because then we'll have 3 markets with the same partner. I don't know. It may simply be that they looked across the big dealer groups and spoke to Inchcape and spoke to Pendragon and spoke to Virtue and Lucas and a couple of others, and then they thought, no, Pendragon's the one for us. So we don't know what went on in the background there, but as an approach, it will be quite interesting to see, because if they follow the same model as continental Europe, you might see a brand centre in London, a brand centre in Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Cardiff, whatever, run by BYD, and then the rest of the support will come out of that dealer group.
It certainly shows the growth and that kind of move now and we know there are operators already in the UK from some of these Chinese brands, but obviously this is their move into Europe, and then obviously this intention in the UK clearly shows that quick strategic growth from the Chinese brands, doesn't it? And UK being on that growth pattern for them.
Yeah, I mean the Chinese in general, and my experience working with Shanghai Auto, on MG Rover, is that they're actually very patient. We think of them as being very fast moving, but it's not actually the way that they look at their own development in some ways. They see themselves as having been the biggest economy in the world for the vast majority of the last 20 centuries. And they see an inevitability about their return to that position, and their expanding presence on the global stage. So they take quite measured steps, and if you look at BYD, then they are quite measured steps. From its foundation, they've taken time to get the product right. They've taken time to start to work into export markets, but it will be a big step, and people like BYD, MG, owned by Shanghai Auto, are likely to be the Chinese brands that we see more often, rather than some of the startups which are on a much faster drumbeat, because they're trying to get into sort of positive cash flow and profitability and so on, to meet the needs of their investors.
Well, plenty of context there, Phil. Steve, as ever, just manages to sort of, shine a laser-like focus on what's happening in the industry, and drawing some parallels there. Is some interesting parallels there with what's happening with Pendragon and what could possibly happen with other dealer groups in the UK and across Europe.
Yeah, and I think part of that was that what was clear is that the Chinese brands. We know that MG are already here. We know that Polestar and smaller ones are already playing, but they are coming. They are coming to the UK and other marketplaces. So when we talk about volumes and targets and registration volumes and things like that, where some of the manufacturers are talking about smaller market shares, more profitable, etc., you can see where some of these Chinese operations they're all talking about a 5% market share in all markets now. That won't be possible. They can't all
No,
have a 5% market share in all markets, but it shows their aspiration growth for volume. And where you've got rental operators, leasing companies, and others that are not high on the list of supply, it may be a case that that's where the Chinese offerings then start to replenish some of the shortfall from other manufacturers. But again, we'll keep a close eye on this one because it's forever moving very quickly at the minute.
it is indeed. So, heading over to The Guardian, the headline there is Cost of Living Crisis is Risk to UK Road Safety, says Halford's boss. So, this is on the back of some financials released by Halfords. And the boss of Halfords, Graham Stapleton, has actually warned that he thinks the cost of living crisis is creating a risk to road safety as drivers are buying older cars and struggling with maintenance costs. So within the story, it talks about how sales in the 20 weeks up to mid-August were more than 30% higher than the same period last year. But these were very much buoyed by a strong performance in its auto centres business, which is really the crux of this story. And of course, Halfords grew that operation in December. We covered it on the podcast with its £62 million takeover of Axle Group, who are the owners of the National Tyre Servicing brand. But the interesting part of this story is what Graham Stapleton says about how the pressure on household budgets amid rising energy bills could actually have a knock-on effect for road safety as cars on the road get older. And we alluded to this in your comments about how the average cars are aging. Those cars on the road, used cars coming to market, are aging.
Yeah, and I think that's key with this. And as I said earlier, we've had the budget or the announcement from the government and what their sort of support package is around the energy cap, etc., and things like this. But you're right. This is a few times when we do get these situations that the first thing that goes is that maintenance, that safety of vehicles that they do start to question that impact on safety. So I think it's one that there is concerns, because if you can't really afford it and your tires are your tire treads are on the edge or whatever, then do you actually just wait a little bit longer than you may do? We're entering the winter months now when things need replacing. You don't quite replace them because you can't afford to, or you've got other money to spend your income on and other things to spend your income on and things like this. So it does call that into question, doesn't it, as this squeeze continues in that cost of living.
Yeah, and I guess a reminder to dealers that they do have databases. They know how old cars are that they regularly maintain, and it's a good opportunity to just get in touch with customers and see what you can do for them. And you will have incentives. You will be able to do some deals just to get these cars back in on a regular basis to keep them maintained.
Yeah, and the dealers do a very good job at
Yeah.
that. That cheap servicing, that winter checks. We are approaching that time of the year where the winter checks will be high on the marketing plan for many dealers to get consumers into their business, get them checks done, and obviously work with them. There's people like Bumper now that are heavy in the dealer market to help with the financing of customers if they do face significantly heavy bills that they can't necessarily afford. There's things like Bumper that offer that credit facility and interest-free options for customers. So there's lots going on to help the customers at this time of the challenges around the cost of living. So again, make sure in terms of dealers listening, your customers are aware. because this will be going on in with their customer base. So yeah, lots to consider.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. And now we're delighted to welcome back our mental health and well-being guru, Stephen Whitton, for the latest Menable Moment. This week, Steve talks about how recent events have made him reflect on loss and grief.
Yeah, hi Phil, hi Curtis, and thanks for having me back for another Menable Moments. We haven't done one for a few weeks, have we? And wow, what a few weeks it's been. Obviously, we can't let this moment go without referring, of course, to the death of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth, of course, and the effect that had on the whole nation, really. And I must admit, I got upset quite a bit, both when it first happened and during the course of the week, and then obviously on the day of the funeral. And not because, I knew the Queen or I'd ever met her or anything like that, but it also triggered all sorts of emotions that reminded me of loss and grief and situations that I've had where people dear to me, very close to me, had passed. And what it did was gave me just a few moments to reflect on how important it is to have empathy for each other during those situations. But then this week, it seems like the whole sorrow and solemnity of the last couple of weeks has kind of slowly faded away, and then we've sprung literally back into reality and normality, whatever that looks like. And it just again reminded me that, wow, how kind of resilient we can be, but also how life goes on and life moves on, and how important it is as well to support and help each other with that. So I want to share a little technique with you that I've used recently in some workshops that I've run. And we've been doing some stuff on psychological safety. I mean, wow, that's worth a whole podcast on its own, to be honest. But also some management development stuff around the industry as well. And I've started now beginning those sessions with the usual intros, as you might imagine. If you've ever been on a training course, you'll probably be familiar with that bit at the beginning. You dread that creeping death introduction. So I've zhuzhed it up a little bit by introducing a very simple question. And what I want to know at the very beginning of any session, at the beginning of any day, is what's got your attention right now? So even as you listen to this, and I know some of you are listening as you are on a run or having a walk or sitting having a coffee or whatever it might be, you're kind of listening, but what's really got your attention? What's going on in your world? And the group of people that I asked this of, first of all, surprised me, because the answers I was getting were things like, I've been up all night because I've got a young baby and he didn't sleep. I woke up this morning and the cat had messed all over the mat in the kitchen, and that's got my attention because I spent the first half hour cleaning that up. I had a near miss in my car in an accident that nearly happened on the way here. So my heart's still beating 10 to the dozen at that. And I had somebody who said that was their daughter's first day back at school, and all through the summer holidays, they'd been bullied online, and they were really concerned as to what that first day back at school was going to be like for them. And this kid is 10. So that was eye-opening for me, because I thought, well, I mean, I know this stuff happens and people have got lives, and obviously there is a real world that happens outside of work and outside of what we do. But just asking the question, what's got your attention right now, just opened up a whole wealth of different things going on. And what it did across the team, that on that session and the other sessions as well, is it created an instant empathy and an instant ability to just go, do you know what? Everyone's got problems, everyone's got issues, everyone's got concerns and anxieties. And like I said, we've sprung back into reality, and the reality this week is the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, the energy situation, just the winter coming, just, a whole raft of things that could be bothering people, as well as what is going on for them privately in their own worlds. And that reminded me of the amount of times that I've run sales meetings in dealerships over the years where at 8:30 in the morning, people are getting a bit of a shoeing, was the phrase we used to use, for not having sold enough cars the day before or not spoken to enough customers. And a vain attempt at motivating them to try and rectify that for the rest of the day, with absolutely no regard whatsoever for what's going on in their world. So that little technique, question, whatever you want to call it, I'd like to share that with you and love you to go off and use that. And at your next meeting, ask them what's got their attention. And don't use it as an opportunity to take the mick. Apologies if your name's Mick, you know what I mean. Take the proverbial. But use it as an opportunity to genuinely empathise and understand and stand shoulder to shoulder with the people that you work with. After all, your business is your people. So there you go. I feel a podcast coming on, guys, on the whole subject of psychological safety. Don't start me on that. I'll catch you soon. See you in a bit.
Well, psychological safety. That's a new phrase to conjure with, and I think it's probably got legs. I think Steve will be returning to that subject.
I think he will. I think he definitely will. I caught up with him this week, and he was out giving himself some retail therapy, and that means that he was in the shops buying some new clothes for a trip that he's going on. So as always, great to catch up and food for thought with a lot of that, isn't it? That it's good to talk and just always consider what's going on in other people's lives more than anything else. But as always, you can get in touch with Stephen if there's anything that you want to talk to him about, or if you want some help within your business or yourself, then you can contact him at Stephen. That's with a PH.Whitton, WHITTON at Menable, which is MENABLE.org. Or as always, he is available through any of the social channels, particularly on LinkedIn. You can find him there, or you can find him at menable.org on the website there. So please do reach out to Steve. He's got a wealth of knowledge and he's there to help and support and be insightful wherever possible.
So back to the headlines. Next story is from Motor Trade News, and the headline is Desire for Car Ownership is Falling. So this is about a reduction in the desire for car ownership, and it's being identified as a growing issue, according to dealers surveyed in September's Startline used car tracker. Now, this is particularly interesting because it's a poll of views within the sector, and it's identifying concerns, not necessarily trends, but concerns among dealers and consumers. What they're hearing from consumers, possibly before they become trends. So these Startline surveys are always interesting. And one of the things that's emerged in this one is a number of customers talking about cutting back from 2 cars perhaps to 1 car, and as a way to save money, keep a lid on household costs.
Yeah, and you can see why with some of this. We saw how much of this is as a direct influence of the pandemic. With the working from home, the changing behaviours, the changing priorities, and things like this. That whether we had a lot of it, didn't we, Curtis, early on in the pandemic, where people were questioning why they've got 2 cars on their driveway. Can they afford the 2 cars on their driveway? And things like this. So there's a lot starting to emerge from this, and we now talk about, I think there's trials in the UK, and there were 4-day working weeks with businesses and things like this. So this whole consumer behaviour, consumer view, and consumer ownership of vehicles is starting to change, isn't it, very, very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And there's an interesting comment there from Paul Burgess, Chief Exec of Startline, who says, this is an interesting point from the tracker research. We are hearing limited anecdotal feedback in the market that in direct response to the cost of living crisis, some families who previously owned 2 cars are making savings by cutting back to 1. Plus, there are undoubtedly other people who are selling their only car when faced with spiraling living costs.
Yeah, and it does. Again, we at the minute with the supply of new and used cars, it doesn't. I mean, I suppose it's a question of what will happen with returns, but this whole future mobility is mobility as a service, or MAAS, as people refer to it as, is starting to emerge now. We're starting to see
Yeah.
how that's changed, and the way people use own their vehicles, and there's a lot more to come on this one. But it is some fascinating insight here from Startline on some of that, and they talk about other factors named as future challenges by dealers include stock availability, which is 65% down. That's down 11% on August. Concerns over ICE vehicles values, that's 42%, and that was up 4% compared to August. Finance availability, which is at 36%, that was again down 10% compared to August. And increasing compliance requirements, interestingly enough, that's down 22%, down to 22% by 12%. So again, there's still a lot for the dealer market to be thinking of at the minute, and a lot of concerns around what the future looks like.
Yeah, and that's actually quite a detailed story. So if you do want more on that survey, then do head over to Motor Trade News for the full lowdown on that. So final story this week is from AM Online, and the headline is Peter Vardy adds used cars and mobility focus after record 2021 financial results. So this is for the 12-month period to the end of December 2022. Wait, it can't be 2022,
21.
can it?
Yeah. Yeah, so the end of December 2021 into 31st December, the 21
Yeah,
financial year.
and that's not even our typo. That's actually in the
That's
story.
notes. Yes, yes, that is, yeah. So, what they are referring to is obviously, Peter Vardy, who is a Motherwell-based AM100 car retailer, a turnover of 572 million, pre-tax profit of 26.1 million, from its Peter Vardy Holdings Limited, Car Money, and Silver Bullet businesses during the 12 months to the end of December there. But again, turning on an equivalent on return on sales of 4.6%, which is a good performance, 4.6%. I mean, some businesses out there would question 4.6 being a good result, but trust me, for motor retail, 4.6 is a good result.
I was going to say within motor retail, that is setting the bar rather high.
It is, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I guess one of the interesting points of this story is how the business has grown since exiting the Volvo franchise, which it represented for 15 years. And I seem to recall when Peter Vardy launched it, it was very much with Vauxhall and maybe BMW, but
Yes.
Vauxhall has been a mainstay of the business throughout its history, but it did exit the brand last year, and in July last year, it transformed its 6 Vauxhall sites into used car supermarkets, and under the new branding of Peter Vardy Cars. And the comment in the story from Peter Vardy is this change significantly increased our brand representation throughout Scotland with Peter Vardy cars. And, it is now an established high profile brand within Scotland. And, that is benefiting the business overall and, making a significant contribution now to the bottom line.
Yeah, and he's moving very quickly with lots of things into, it was mentioned earlier that finance broker, which is Car Money, which sits under that business as well. He's obviously got his Goodbye car product, which is purchasing vehicles directly from consumers. But he's also now talking that in 2021, they launched a new mobility division, which is talking about their leasing business, Flex Auto vehicle rental. And also then they're talking about a thing called Gen Plus, which is an online leadership program for school children, which began trials with 750 pupils across schools in August of last year. So they're on with a lot of things, aren't they, Curtis?
They're incredibly busy, and a shout out to Peter Vardy and the team there. There's a lot going on at the business, and you're more than welcome to come on to the podcast to have a chat about current and future plans.
Yeah, definitely. But that's it for this week. So, as always, we urge you to head over to the stories that we talked about. We'll just give you a quick headline and a quick discussion on each of those. And there's plenty of stories hitting every minute of every day at the minute. And as always, do stay tuned next week for the full interview with Steve Young from ICDP. Trust me, you will find it extremely interesting and give you a lot of things to consider for what the future does look like. And as always, Stephen Whitton is one that always there available to support your business in the world of mental health or well-being. So please do reach out to Stephen if you do need any help on that.
That's all for now. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. We're back with the headlines next weekend, plus a sneak preview of September's used car values with Cap HPI's Darren Martin. And as Phil says, do watch out for our special weekday interview with Steve Young. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.